I never imagined my life would come to this, a woman in her mid-40s, standing alone in a beautiful house, feeling more invisible than ever. My husband was always away, his business trip stretching from days into weeks, and when he finally returned, it felt more like a formality than a homecoming. We barely spoke beyond polite small talk. Intimacy had long since disappeared outwardly. I kept up appearances, cooking, cleaning, smiling at neighbors, but inside I was fading. It was early spring when he told me he'd be leaving again, this time for almost a month. I nodded as I always did, pretending to understand. I didn't protest. I never did somewhere along the way. I had accepted this life, or at least convinced myself that I had. A week after he left, my stepson, Aidan, came home from college for spring break. He was 22 now, tall, polite, carrying himself with a quiet confidence. I had helped raise him since middle school, and our relationship had always been formal, reserved, but now something had shifted. It wasn't inappropriate. Not at first, but it was different. I caught the way his eyes lingered just a little too long, the way his compliments, once casual, now felt more personal. "You look beautiful today," he said one morning, standing in the kitchen, his voice warm. I laughed it off, but my heart fluttered. We started spending more time together, mostly by accident. At first he'd helped carry groceries, offer to cook dinner with me, sit close during late-night TV shows. I told myself it was nothing, but I wasn't blind to the tension growing between us. I felt it every time his hand brushed mine, every time he stood a little too close. One evening we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. He turned to me and said, "I admire how you hold everything together, how strong you are." For him, I didn't know what to say. No one had praised me like that in years. Something about the honesty in his voice slipped past the walls I'd built around myself. And in that moment when I looked at him, I didn't just see my stepson. I saw a man who saw me, a man who noticed I was still alive. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our conversations, the way he looked at me, the way I didn't pull away. I told myself it was harmless, but deep down I knew I was lying. This wasn't just loneliness anymore. I had crossed a line, even if nothing had happened yet. The next morning, when he smiled at me, my heart raced in a way I hadn't felt in years. I realized I was craving that attention, craving the feeling of being wanted, even if it was wrong. For the first time in a long while, I felt awake, but I was also terrified, because I knew if something didn't stop me soon, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop myself at all. I should have walked away. I should have seen it coming. But duty, loyalty, they all blurred that Thursday evening. The house was unusually quiet, and the air felt heavier, almost expectant. I had just finished dinner when the rain began pounding hard against the roof, and then the power went out. No lights, no distractions, only the dim, flickering glow of candles casting long shadows across the room. The atmosphere shifted, grew closer, more intimate. Aidan walked into the living room, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Thought you could use this," he said, smiling gently. I hesitated, but then took the glass. We sat together in silence. The only sound, the steady tap of rain against the windows. The wine loosened something in me. Our conversation wandered from old memories to hidden emotions. He spoke about feeling lost lately, about how being home made him feel safe, how I made him feel safe. I listened, comforted by the honesty, craving it more than I wanted to admit. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. "You don't even realize how incredible you are." "Do you?" I stared at him, confused, but he didn't look away. You deserve someone who sees you," he continued. "Someone who makes you feel alive." My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to correct him, to tell him this was inappropriate, but I didn't. I let his words sink in, let them touch the hollow places inside me I had long ignored. I was starving for affection, for validation, and right then it didn't seem to matter who was offering it. I found myself admitting aloud, "Sometimes it feels like I'm disappearing in this house, like no one even sees me anymore." He reached for my hand, holding it gently. "Or And I didn't pull away. It felt so natural, so quiet, as if we had been pulled not by choice, but by circumstance. His touch wasn't aggressive. It was tender. It was real. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. His eyes didn't just see me, they held me, filling in the empty spaces my husband had long since abandoned. He leaned closer. I should have stopped him. I didn't. When our lips met, it was soft, tentative, a kiss heavy with all the unspoken words we hadn't dared voice. It wasn't wild or hurried. It was deep, aching, inevitable. When it ended, we sat in silence, the weight of what we had just done hanging between us. I stood up, murmured that I needed to go to bed, and left him sitting there without another word. But sleep didn't come. My heart raced. My mind spiraled. What we had done wasn't just a kiss, it was betrayal, not just of my husband, but of the woman I believed myself to be. And yet, in the darkest corner of my heart, I didn't feel regret. I felt awakened, seen, touched, in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. I couldn't explain it, I didn't even want to, but I knew one thing, with absolute certainty: nothing would ever be the same again. Something had shifted between us, something I could never put back the next morning. I moved through the kitchen like everything was normal, but nothing felt the same. I avoided his eyes, focusing on the clatter of plates and the simmer of coffee, desperate for the distraction. But Aidan walked in casually, a quiet confidence about him that hadn't been there before, like a line had been crossed, and he wasn't sorry for it. He offered to help with breakfast. I nodded without looking up. The tension between us was thick, silent, undeniable. We didn't speak of the kiss. We didn't have to. It hung between us, loud and heavy, impossible to forget. I kept telling myself it had been a moment of weakness, just to lapse, nothing more. But when his hand brushed mine again, I didn't pull away. When he reached over me for a plate, standing too close, I felt it. The rush of heat, the shame, the excitement wearing inside me. Later that afternoon, I caught him watching me, not in a casual, careless way, but with focus, with intention. His eyes followed my every movement, studied my face, lingered on the small details no one else ever noticed anymore, not even my husband. It was wrong. I knew it, but I couldn't stop myself from wanting more. Aidan began spending more time at home, making excuses to be near me. Movie nights, errands, walks. We didn't need to take our conversations deep, and he asked about my childhood, my dreams, all the things I'd quietly sacrificed for a marriage that gave me nothing back. I tried to set boundaries, tried to explain this couldn't happen, that it was dangerous, reckless. He nodded, listened, even apologized, but the very next time we were alone, he leaned in close and whispered, "I can't stop thinking about you. You deserve more than being invisible to a man who doesn't even notice when you cry yourself to sleep." Every word he said felt like a thread, sewing me back together, pieces of me I hadn't even realized were broken one night. He touched my face gently and said, "You don't have to keep pretending you're allowed to feel something again." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The way I looked at him said everything. The emotional line had long since been crossed. What followed wasn't planned. It wasn't even a decision. It was inevitable. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was a woman torn between guilt and desire, between loyalty and the aching need to be seen, to be wanted. I kept telling myself I was still in control, that I could stop it before it went too far. But deep down, I knew I had already fallen. And even as I gave into it, I feared what came next. Not just the risk of being discovered, but the hollow aftermath I knew was waiting for me. Aidan's break was coming to an end, and when he left, when the house swallowed me up again, I wondered, would he take this fragile new version of me with him, or would he leave me behind more broken than before, this time by a choice I could never undo? The weight of what we had done began to press down on both of us. I could see it in Aidan's quiet moments, the way he looked at me, but said less, and less. Our silence no longer felt intimate. It felt heavy, guilty. He started packing with every shirt folded, every zipper pulled shut. It felt like pieces of my fragile world were collapsing. Yes, we had crossed a line, but now what? We never spoke about what came next. He didn't make promises. I didn't ask for any. I didn't want illusions. I'd already spent too many years wrapped in the false security of a marriage with a man who barely noticed I was there. But what Aidan and I shared had been different. It was raw. It was wrong, but it had been real. And now it had to end the night before his departure. He came to me for the first time since this all began. He looked unsure. He didn't reach for me. He just stood there, searching for words that didn't seem to come finally. In a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't regret anything, but I don't want to ruin your life either." I nodded, unable to find my voice. My throat tightened painfully. I wasn't sure if what I felt was heartbreak or relief. The next morning, I stood by the door like a stranger watching someone walk out of her life without ceremony, without promises, no goodbyes, just a moment severed. Cleaned the house, returned to its familiar stillness, but this time it felt colder, emptier. Days passed. My husband returned, carrying souvenirs and stories of business meetings as if nothing had changed. He didn't notice the way I avoided his eyes. He didn't notice the way I had hollowed out inside. I had given myself emotionally, physically to someone else, and it showed, but only to me. At first I thought guilt would consume me, but it didn't. What consumed me was sadness, a deep, aching sadness, not just for what I had done, but for all the years I had wasted feeling invisible. The real betrayal wasn't in the kiss or the touch. It was in realizing that someone who wasn't supposed to matter had seen me, truly seen me in a way my husband hadn't in years. Aidan texted once a simple message: "Take care of yourself." I stared at it for hours before finally deleting it because I knew we couldn't continue, and I knew I couldn't go back to who I was before I had changed, and that change was irreversible. In the end, I was left with a marriage still standing at least on the surface, but inside it was hollow. A shell I wandered through beside a man who thought everything was just fine. The real punishment wasn't being caught, it was living with the truth. In silence every day, I learned that love without attention is just habit, and attention without commitment is just temptation. Somewhere in between those two truths, I lost a version of myself that I will never get.